Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Front Page Fitness. This is episode number 10. We are officially in double digits. Thanks to all the heroes who have been around since episode 1 for the entire journey. I'm Eric Trexler, as always, joined by the Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple. Lauren, how are we doing today?
We are doing well, but for once, you're the hated one, not me. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, that's a good place to start. It's very curious because I don't believe you've done anything to become more likable. If anything, I think you've continued to agitate and poke at the hive of bees, so to speak, on the internet. I've just been minding my business, been trying to spend time with my family, trying to enrich my community in a variety of ways. And I've been getting a lot of hate. And so, really what it comes down to, you might be thinking, of all the divisive, contentious topics in health and fitness and just in the broader discourse these days, what bear trap has Eric accidentally skipped into this time? And the answer is cannolis. I admittedly did not know that there was such a big cannoli community. I have become educated about that community, mostly against my will. But people are very upset that I reiterated the established precedent that tacos are sandwiches, but I was not as receptive to the idea of a cannoli being a sandwich. Apparently that's an extremely unpopular opinion, and I just want to clear the air. If you could give me some space to do that, Lauren, speaking to the camera, the crowd, the community, the listeners, I apologize for all the people I offended. I apologize to everyone I let down. This saga has taken a big toll on me, which I'm fine with, but also my family. And that's kind of why I need to just cut bait, accept the loss, and apologize. So you win. Everyone on the internet who says a cannoli is a sandwich, I'm sorry. All I've ever tried to do since day one, Lauren, is come on this show and try to provide free, entertaining, educational, evidence-based content. And when possible, I try to rely on the best available science. When we cover topics that start to veer outside the realm of science, I try to lean on completely airtight, established case law. And that was what guided me in this case. And I am not aware of any cases related to cannolis being sandwiches that have actually been adjudicated in courts, especially not in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So I'm sorry. I had no case law to fall back on. I iterated to the best of my ability, and I erred. So Lauren, if it's okay with you, I'd like to knock out a few food-related questions and just get all the hate out of the way. And then hopefully we can kind of pick up the pieces and move on together as a show.
First, I'd like to push back with some other case law.
Okay.
Because it turns out that according to a Massachusetts court, a burrito is not a sandwich. According to the USDA, a sandwich is meat between two slices of bread. Very anti-vegan, anti-vegetarian. Also, the USDA, a burrito is a sandwich-like product. According to the court in New York, if it's served on something remotely bread-like, it is a sandwich. So, you leaned on this one particular case, and it turns out there's actually a lot of dueling legal precedent for what is and what is not a sandwich. I don't think you really did your due diligence. I think you just randomly Googled and clicked on something, no. and that's not evidence-based.
You're way off. You're so wrong on this. I can't believe this from you. First of all, I'm stunned that you are reaching this hard. A burrito and a taco are not the same thing. That case law is not pertinent. The USDA just mandating on a whim this ridiculous. Neither of us would accept that definition. Surely, there's never been a sandwich without meat. That's preposterous. I think you're reaching here. I think that it's pretty. If we want to look at the actual adjudication of cases where the specific question is being asked, is a taco a sandwich? that's pretty straightforward. I think these other cases are far less relevant, but I I just want to kind of hammer out the rest of these, get the controversies out of the way, and again, just hope that I can shield my family from the barrage of hate that's been coming our way for the last several weeks.
The poisonous cannoli boxes you've been receiving?
Honestly, I wouldn't even mind if people wanted to send me some cannolis. That would be fine with me. I trust that they won't be poisoned, or even if they are poisoned, if they're just lightly poisoned. If it's going to give me a tummy ache, I can live with that kind of poison, as long as it's not like super bad stuff.
I did pull the transcript, and your argument for why a cannoli is not a sandwich is because you can't unwrap it because it's a harder shell casing, and so it was that coupled with the sweet filling that you said no go on the sandwich.
Yeah, for whatever reason, the fact that there's not a variety of fillings, like in terms of, with a taco, hey, I'm going to have a fish taco, a veggie taco, I'm going to have a chicken taco, beef taco. I feel like that is reminiscent of the sandwich family, where you have a variety of savory options and combinations that can go in. I think the cannoli, I'm not certain how you make them, but I think you basically bake the shell as a single piece and then just kind of fill some cream in when you're done with that. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, but that's kind of irrelevant, because if your first argument is that it needs to be, multiple options for fillings, then
okay,
is a grilled cheese not a sandwich?
Yeah, you can put other stuff in grilled cheeses.
You can, but a grilled cheese in and of itself is cheese.
Yeah, that's one of the
that's
options.
A sandwich.
Yeah, it's got a savory filling. Here's my question. If you're going to do a cannoli, I don't want to, get too deep into the rabbit hole here, but explain to me, if you would, how a cannoli is a sandwich and an ice cream cone isn't.
Perhaps an ice cream cone?
You've lost your mind.
All right, listen. If we're saying it is a filling encased in an outer layer, because otherwise a burrito is not a sandwich. A burrito is I never
made any claims about a burrito. I was purely on the taco side. Okay. Burrito.
Wrap?
I think a wrap. Yeah, you can fit in there. Is it
a burrito? Is a wrap?
Yeah. I'd say probably a burrito is a sandwich. But a cannoli, there is no distinction between a cannoli and an ice cream cone. So this is just a really dangerous slippery slope that we're on.
False, because in a cannoli it's an even distribution, and in a cone, especially if you have one of those wafer cones, then the ice cream is not evenly distributed. The ice cream is sort of on top of said cone.
We'll see. Let's get into some of the new questions, the novel questions, if we may. Is a Pop-Tart a sandwich? No. What do you think, Lauren?
Yes, by definition, if we're saying it's things and there's a filling, yeah. If a panini, a calzone, if these are sandwiches, a Pop-Tart is also a sandwich.
Okay, I'm going to leave the one for the last. I'm going to skip around a little bit. This one, is cereal a soup? I would actually say yes. I think that's pretty fair.
Absolutely not. A soup implies the broth being prepared with the ingredients that are going in it.
I don't know enough about soup. I'm not a soupman. I'll defer to you on this one. I don't have a strong feeling in the soup world. I've always considered soup to be a complete waste of time, to be honest. We were in Austin for a conference not too long ago, and I told you I'd never had miso soup in my life, and you thought I was like lying or playing some kind of prank. But yeah, soup takes too long to consume, and as a person who loves eating, I just don't have time for that.
If we just have to take a liquid and add a solid to it, and then that's a soup, then a drink with ice is a soup by that logic.
Yeah, or my gritty creatine sitting at the bottom of a beverage when I mix it in. That would also be a soup, I suppose. Okay, this is one that I legitimately don't get. Someone asked, I assume this is a real question that came in, is mac and cheese a collection of small sandwiches? I don't even really understand the premise there. I don't see who's making that argument. I think it's completely baseless.
I unfortunately have to agree with you. I could say maybe ravioli would be a collection of small sandwiches.
Yeah, I could get on board with that in a general sense, but I think they might be taking a dig at you with the cannoli being the kind of cylindrical enclosure serving as the bread.
You already apologized to the cannoli community, and now you're
No,
apologizing.
I'm just saying I think that's where they're going with it. So I believe that we reached agreement on one one of these, and that probably means it's time to call that a win and move on. How does that sound?
That sounds good.
All right, Lauren. Staying in the topic of food and beverage, this is a question that you mentioned you've been seeing it a lot lately. And just as an aside, with Eric Helms, another member of the Mass Research Review team, I host Iron Culture, a different podcast, and we have like a portal for people to submit questions. And one of the things I tend to find is that questions in health and fitness come in waves. Like there's very, very palpable trends. So like there will be one day where we'll get 4 questions at the same time that are about like testosterone replacement therapy. And I'm like, who the hell just released a huge video about TRT? Like it's like super clear. They just come in waves, but it sounds like you've been seeing a wave of interest in alcohol and fat burning. So what's the background here?
Yes, there have been some reels going around saying if you consume alcohol, then your fat burning ability is shut down for the following 72 hours. So if you're somebody who is in a calorie deficit, then those 3 days are basically wasted.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is not accurate. So that's the first thing. What's really odd to me, when you hear a claim like that, it is so specific. Like I'm used to the kind of vague claims or the ones that you're like, okay, technically that's true, but not really. So like a good example is like after super high intensity exercise, I think we've talked previously about excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. Your energy expenditure remains elevated. I'm saying that in quotes for, sometimes in excess of 24 hours. However, that's kind of misleading because there's like a huge elevation for like, an hour after that workout, and it plummets very, very quickly to the extent that like there is research suggesting that we can detect the most modest elevation above baseline in the world 24 hours later in some cases. So you at least see where that's coming from, but you're like, all right, that's not really what's going on here. So anyway, usually I'm looking for claims where there's like a grain of truth. With this one, I just don't really understand. I tried to look for the most cherry-picked instance of 72 hours later. I couldn't even find like the most obscure, like, we took cells out of a mouse, put them in a petri dish, dripped alcohol on them, incubated it for 3. I couldn't find anything that could even reach to this claim. So I'd be curious to see where it all like originated, but here's the lowdown, Lauren. I'm not going to get too into the weeds, but I in my lab I study metabolism. That's what we do, mostly in terms of just total energy expenditure. But certainly, if you study metabolism, you got to brush up on the old biochemistry and understand the metabolism of different macronutrients. So normally we're thinking about metabolizing carbs, fats, and protein, but you can get into the weeds on the metabolic eventual metabolism of byproducts from fiber, for example, lesser, not talked about as frequently. And alcohol isn't talked about as frequently because obviously, people aren't generally telling you, hey, get 20% of your calories from alcohol. It's usually not a solid recommendation that you hear. So alcohol metabolism is kind of thrown off to the periphery, and you only really study it if you do coursework in macronutrient metabolism. But the general story with macronutrient metabolism is, we can kind of think of it as these faders that are going up and down. So a lot of times people say, well, at rest you burn fat. Well, that's true. You burn predominantly fat. But depending on what you had your last meal, when you had it, more often than not, we're seeing a combination of mostly fat at rest and some carbohydrate and a tiny, tiny bit of protein and maybe some short chain fatty acids that were broken down from fiber from the last meal. And then, of course, if you have alcohol, that's coming into the mix as well. And so the body is kind of constantly evaluating, what do we have access to? What are our immediate energy needs? What is, what can we get away with burning promptly, either because it's the easiest to break down or we just want to get rid of it while it's here. And so it is absolutely true. For example, let's say you're at rest burning purely fat. You have a huge influx of sugar. You drink a giant glass of, 100% sugar juice or whatever. Yeah, you're going to ramp up carbohydrate metabolism very promptly because there's this huge influx of carbohydrate. You got to deal with that. So you're going to be putting some away as glycogen. You're going to be burning some off. There's kind of a hierarchy that is always shifting based on the circumstances. And the short version with alcohol is when you got a bunch of alcohol in your system, your body wants to get rid of it. It's easy to break down. It's got a bunch of energy, and needless to say, your body wants to clear it. So why not metabolize it kind of at the top of that hierarchy or that pecking order? So yeah, when you consume alcohol, your body is going to move it up to the front of the queue. It is going to metabolize it predominantly. Obviously, if you're metabolizing more of X, then you're metabolizing less of Y and Z. There's these dimmers that kind of move up and down accordingly. So yeah, you're going to burn more alcohol in the short term when you just consumed alcohol for, let's say for a handful of hours until you've cleared that out of your system. And then after that, you're right back to normal. And so at the end of the day, those calories, it doesn't really matter in the long run if you had burned them as alcohol or as sugar, as carbohydrate or as fat in terms of like your energy balance over time. The calories you're getting from alcohol are doing nothing special. It is true that they're moving to the top of the line. So you're burning those instead of fat in the short term. But in terms of, 24-hour or 7-day energy balance, just your overall calories in, calories out over a longer time frame, it's a blip in the radar. It really doesn't, it's not shutting down any kind of process that's going to actually lead to more fat gain, aside from just the calories that are coming in from the alcohol.
Yeah, so like what we talked about the other episode, that your short-term energy expenditure, fuel utilization, what have you, is not translated to these longer-term adaptations that we actually care about.
Yeah. All right, Lauren, hopefully that clip I just laid down there, talking through alcohol metabolism, I have a feeling that's going to go viral. It was engaging, it was snappy, it was flashy. So surely, Lauren, this myth of fat burning being halted for 72 hours is going to die, because that little clip right there is going to spread like wildfire and get shared much more than the scary thing about how you're not going to burn fat for 72 hours, which, by the way, that's not compatible with human life, basically. The idea that you're just not going to utilize any fat for 72 hours. It would take a very extreme experimental condition to make that work and also still be alive. So that was one of the red flags where I was like, yeah, that claim, I don't think I'm even going to find a grain of truth to it. All right, Lauren. So moving on from alcohol, let's talk. We've been keeping things pretty classy, I think, in this episode. Let's talk a little poop. We haven't talked at all about, 30 raw eggs giving you gas. We haven't talked about fart walks. So I think it's time to go back into the gutter, which seems to be our sweet spot. So Lauren, you post a headline. You seem to really I feel like you have a grudge with the New York Post, because you are in the New York Post all the time, trying to call them out. So the headline here.
Last week they gave us how many crunches can you do in every decade, and this week they're giving us poop.
Yeah. So the headline is, "Phew, this much simpler habit is better at fixing your gut health than a poop transplant, says scientists." So, Lauren, you let me know where you want to go with it. I am curious to see what the simpler habit is. I'm also curious to see if you know anything about the current state of poop transplants.
The funniest part about this article is that it says, as if it were shocking, turns out fecal transplants are number 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
What? What percentage of the population was thinking this is number 1? But yeah, the study.
I see what they're doing. You get what they're getting at there. They're trying to make a number two as opposed to going number one. That's the pun they're going for.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So they did. I think
Put
that
it to them. Fine.
no, it's a borderline pun because what they did linguistically makes sense, but it's also based on a totally false premise just to squeeze it in. So I'll it's borderline. I think we'll let it pass. But we need to keep an eye on Diana Bruck here and see if she's doing more of these contrived puns because if they're not rooted in truth, we're playing a dangerous game.
So this was a study in rodents, but ultimately they were excited about it and they concluded that eating a healthy high fiber diet was more effective than a poop transplant for gut recovery. Are you familiar with the whole poop transplant hypothesis?
Yeah, I looked into it several years ago, but honestly, I kind of tabled it because researchers tabled it. So basically, there was a lot of promise. The idea being you could, if you had like a totally out of whack gut microbiome, and we're not talking about like, ooh, I want to optimize and go from kind of good to very good, but like, for whatever reason, if you had some kind of like pathology or extreme course of antibiotic treatment where your gut microbiome was just wiped out, or you had like a bacterial overgrowth condition or something like that. The idea was you could get a fecal transplant from someone with a more health compatible microbiome makeup, and it would kind of repopulate your GI tract, or at least the lower end of it, with kind of a better distribution of bacterial colonies. But I kind of lost track with where it was at because there were a few human trials that were going on and they got halted because there were like some pretty serious adverse events. And like, Lauren, you and I both know, like with medical trials, they don't always just like slam the brakes on these things at the first sight of an adverse event. Like if there's enough reason to shut down essentially all of the ongoing human trials in this area, it was some nasty stuff. So I lost interest in that around that point and really haven't stayed up to date with whether or not those trials have kind of, if they figured out how to do it without, while mitigating the risks of those adverse effects. So do you have any idea where the state of that research is?
I don't believe it has progressed in human trials. And so, as I mentioned, this was done in rodents,
Yeah.
which obviously scientists can take a bit more risk there. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
Here's the
imagine
problem, though.
recruitment for the poop transplant trial would be a bit challenging as well.
Yeah, and that's before everyone knew it was dangerous. Imagine if then they're like, oh, so you're gonna put someone else's poop inside me. Also, also, it seems like this has gone very, very poorly, and people have gotten very sick from this. So that's 0 for 2 in my book.
Not like the Starbucks gift card.
Another thing that kind of bothered me about this, trying to extrapolate this rodent model stuff into humans, when it comes to, you know, I think
Most
that,
things.
well, but especially when it comes to, I think the route of delivery is typically for humans, they were trying to essentially encapsulate it. Is that right? I
Mm.
think that's the case, and then you would consume it like orally. Like I don't think they were actually doing like a rectal transplant. I could be wrong on that, but anyway, the pertinent part is that a lot of this stuff on the gut microbiome comes from rodent species that are very much known to eat their own poop when they're in the cage. And I feel like that's just like such a tremendously severe confounding factor, that it's like if the whole idea is like a fecal transplant, it kind of matters that you're also like chowing down on poop all day. Um, so anyway, yeah, I remember getting into this research and then being like, I have major concerns about how this will translate. The trials that were ongoing were all canceled. And so I think, much to your point, I'm going to have to throw a demerit to Diana here. Fecal transplants being number 2, I think fecal transplants really aren't even on the list right now. I think people have pretty much punted on that for myriad reasons. But nonetheless, sometimes you gotta reach for the pun. And just as a note, it's really interesting to see how I feel like lay press articles on gut health, they like in my mind really hit their peak. Like they started as nothing. No one cared about gut health. And then they there was this like crescendo to the point that like it felt like every couple days you're hearing a new study about gut health. And then it kind of plateaued, if not tapered off, of people just saying like, well, we thought we were going to kind of sort out all this stuff and have a lot of concrete answers, but like still a lot of the details elude the top scientists who actually work on this stuff. Like it's still extremely difficult to characterize what a healthy gut is. It's still extremely difficult to very strategically manipulate a gut microbiome. Within the same person, we find that their gut microbiome changes dramatically over time without any conscious effort on their end. So yeah, it's really interesting that the gut health stuff, it kind of caught on fire, had this huge crescendo up to a climax, this big peak where it was like every other day there was new stuff you were hearing and new myths getting propagated. And now it's kind of like simmered to this point where I feel like every article that isn't absolute trash basically ends the way this one does, which is it's a good reminder that eating foods rich in fiber, such as berries, beans, nuts, seeds, oatmeal, lentils, and avocado, will keep your gut happy. Like that is pretty much like the extent of our knowledge after like a zillion years of this research and a zillion articles covering the research is like eat stuff that grows, preferably with a bunch of fiber, and try to eat more than one food a day. Have a little diversity, and other than that, good luck and don't take really strong oral antibiotics for a long time unless you really need to.
It's also incredibly complicated because whenever you have a sample and you have a budget and you're deciding what it is that we're going to measure, I mean, you know that if you have blood or you have muscle or it doesn't matter what it is, right? You're limited. And when you're talking about trying to do gut microbiome analysis, that is a huge question. There's so many things that you could potentially measure, and you have to make a choice. And so that's why in the data, you'll say, okay, we measured this and we measured that, but there's 1,000 other things that we could have looked at. And that's inherently limiting, right? Because you're going to make claims about something big, 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 big picture, but you only actually looked at this particular strain of bacteria, for example.
Yeah. I will say that now that I'm housed in a department of evolutionary anthropology instead of like exercise science, a lot more poop going on. I should have seen that coming, but our department really specializes in primate evolution. So there's a bunch of people who study primates, either in, like wildlife refuges or like animal sanctuaries where they kind of live their normal life, but they're in a protected environment. Or just primates out in the wild. And there's just a whole bunch of folks in the department who, a couple baboons, as Diana would say, go number two, and they scamper on out there, grab samples and get what they can from it. So not a lot of microbiome stuff, but you can actually get a number of hormones from the feces, which is kind of cool. So I've
I
learned a
like
lot.
to take credit from everything that goes on in this lab, but have you personally done any fecal analysis?
Not professionally, no. No, I'm not taking credit. I'm tipping my cap, uh, literally at the good folks who do this interesting research. We just had a joint lab meeting with people who are actually studying thyroid hormone metabolites in the feces of wild baboons. So I'm just trying to share some anecdotes that are top of mind. I'm sorry to give people a window into my day to day.
It's not
We
your day to day.
I was at the meeting. Okay, that's all I can tell you. I just because I didn't have two gloves and a pile of poop in front of me doesn't mean I wasn't at the meeting. Okay, I'm not going to be an author on the paper, regrettably. So, no credit taken. All right, Lauren, you're getting very heated, very contentious. So I think maybe it's time to move on. I think we found another topic that kind of gets you a little bit agitated. So um, let's briefly, I just want to briefly touch on this one topic, and then we can get on to skinny talk, my favorite topic of all, obviously. But I actually contributed a link. Okay, a rare reversal of roles here. So I found one that said a 41-year-old longevity doctor says his biological age is 24. He takes 3 supplements daily. So, needless to say, the general point of the article is surely these 3 supplements are what essentially cheated death. It brought this man back from 41 years old to only 24. Quite a feat. So, Lauren, if you had to guess what these 3 supplements are, out of curiosity, what would you guess? What are top of mind?
I already looked.
See,
You have to write a note.
lack of preparedness is the key to making this show work. So, the that's why I work so hard to not prepare every week. So he takes a vitamin B complex with folate, magnesium, and omega-3 fatty acids. I will say, generally not the worst idea in the world to get some omega-3 fatty acids. Don't necessarily have to supplement with it. You know, you can eat some fatty fish from time to time. You can do what Lauren does and eat tremendous amounts of seaweed. For a while there, when Lauren, when we first met, your diet was at least like conservatively 40% seaweed. So I feel very confident that you were getting your marine origin omega-3s in spades. But anyway, those are the 3 supplements. And so the reason I wanted to talk about this is you're going to see folks that write these kind of articles, people that make these kind of claims. It seems to be a new genre of health and fitness. I think his name's Brian Johnson, the super rich guy who's trying to like live forever, basically. He was draining blood out of his son and stealing it. That was an interest. I don't think he does that anymore, but that was an interesting saga. So people have gotten really into these kind of creative ways to kind of get into life extension, but the way they like to do it, because it's not really that interesting to say like, hey, Lauren, I just started taking 3 supplements and I'm going to check in with you in about 60 years to see if I lived long enough for it to be interesting. Right? It's really hard to generate that content now, and it's even harder to sell those supplements now. So I need to give you something in the short term. And so really what's going on is people are kind of cherry picking a bunch of different indices that, you know, they may have a role in like cohort based research in big populations. Where we might say, okay, let's look at, you know, some of the biomarkers that are associated with aging and try to kind of approximate this. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're seeing is people who are kind of cherry picking these tests. I would venture to say in some cases, they might even be kind of strategically kind of, you know, almost like in high school when they would teach the test and be like, instead of teaching you science, I'm going to teach you what's on the state science exam very deliberately and specifically. So I think you're going to get a lot of that, especially because there's so many of these different biological age metrics out there. But at the end of the day, pay these articles no mind whatsoever. They're really not useful in any way. And these, you know, little flash in the pan articles about like, oh, I dropped my biological age 17 years. You're going to find someone else who says, well, I dropped mine 26 years. And then someone else who says, I dropped mine 41 years. And they're all going to croak. We all will. What they're doing is not robust enough to ultimately inform what we know about healthy aging and life extension. And if you wanted to basically take all the rigorous evidence-based information about healthy aging and life extension, you could fit it on essentially a Post-it note. Basically, build enough muscle and strength to maintain your independence and bone density. Avoid super risky things. Don't do a bunch of drugs. Don't smoke. Don't overconsume alcohol. Eat a reasonably healthy diet based on the stuff we all know to be true. You know, any kind of diet quality indicator score that would be high is going to be indicative of a pretty well-rounded diet. Maintain physical activity. Maintain social connections. Don't don't in your older years try to the best of your ability to maintain social connections that bring you fulfillment and purpose every day. And that's kind of the big stuff. Lauren, anything that I'm forgetting on the short list of things to do if you want to live for a while?
Don't get those vitamin injections at a med spa.
Yeah, there's no reason to do those.
There are increasing numbers of cases of people developing these drug-resistant infections, like skin-eating bacteria that can be really, really problematic. Not worth it to get a 12 injection.
Yeah, I wrestled back in the day, so I know a thing or two about being afraid of drug-resistant skin infections. MRSA was like going around big time when I was younger, so we were all terrified of those things. So I certainly wouldn't voluntarily walk into a situation where those things are apparently rampant. The one thing I forgot to mention, Lauren, which is a big one, is on top of all those things, generally speaking, it's a good idea to maintain your adiposity, the amount of body fat you store, within the kind of range that seems to correlate well with longevity. So not ultra, ultra, ultra lean, not a tremendous amount of excess fat. And even if you do have a lot of excess fat, still do all the other things. And like it's not like having extra fat is immediately going to curtail your lifespan to a completely standardized amount, right? It's all about kind of checking as many of these boxes as you feasibly can, while building a lifestyle that you find to be enjoyable and fulfilling. So yeah, those 3 supplements, I mean, hey, if this man really took 17 years off of his biological age, certainly happy for him. I have my doubts, but more power to him. More importantly, no need to replicate that protocol. Just do the basic stuff that I mentioned, and we're all going to end up in the same place. All right, Lauren.
Very positive.
Hey, it's reality. I've got about a zillion books behind me. If you're watching on YouTube, probably a decent third of those are about Buddhism. So yes, I'm all about accepting that and then planning accordingly. Okay. So Lauren, you put a headline in here in the outline that caught me by surprise because I had no idea what it is. Still honestly not super sure, but I trust that this will be an interesting conversation nonetheless. All it says here is skinny talk. And that's talk T-O-K.
That's right. So SkinnyTok was a new trend on TikTok. Basically, women promoting the idea that you should try to be as skinny as possible, no emphasis on health or muscle or longevity, none of that. Let's just eat as little as possible, be as thin as possible, and, a lot of videos and images around how much weight I lost and how amazing I look. And TikTok actually banned the hashtag because there's so much pushback about how problematic this was. And I mean, frankly, glorifying eating disorders.
Yeah. And so when you say ban a hashtag, does that mean basically you're making a post and you're putting in all the hashtags? You try to put it in and they just say, no, you can't do that, but you can still post the content and everything?
Yeah, so they don't ban content, but they can remove the hashtag such that it doesn't spread as virally as it was. I think.
Yeah. What if, Lauren, I know you're not a TikTok compliance expert, at least not professionally, but
I have the app. I've
okay.
a couple times.
Well, there you go. So you're a lot further along than I am in developing this expertise. Yeah. So what I tend to find in social media is what I believe to be a totally fruitless endeavor. But if people believe they're typing a word that is going to like adversely affect the algorithmic reach of their post, they will put in different characters or slightly misspell it. So what if I did hashtag SkinnyTok, but I put the letter 1 where the I would be? Have you tested this out?
I haven't. I'm not actually an active member of the SkinnyTok community, but you come up with an interesting point. I'm not sure if they've thought about all of these things.
Well, I'm willing to consult with them. I think they have the cash to afford my hourly rate. So I can tell them all the different ways. Maybe for the TOK, you put the at symbol where the O would be. I feel like readers could still discern that. So yeah, I'll help them try to figure out these rascals who are trying to get around the algorithm. But so what is the thrust of this article? Is it just kind of saying the obvious, like this is super problematic and it's probably a good thing that the hashtag has been banned, or is there some other wrinkle or element to this that is causing chatter and discussion?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it's sort of interesting and obviously unfortunate that we're kind of coming back to this place because certainly I think thinness was very prioritized in media, in magazines, in movies, um, 20 years ago.
It's a big 90s thing. Yeah, I grew up in the 90s, and I remember that all the like models who were kind of promoted as being the most beautiful women on the planet when I was like a kid were extremely, extremely thin. And as you're alluding to, that kind of fell out of favor and did not, to some extent. It seemed like in popular culture there was a kind of a emphasis on a different body type, which is totally normal to see that, the beauty standards that are popularly recognized vary from culture to culture and vary within a culture over time. So yeah, does it seem like things are moving back in that direction now?
Yeah, I think what we've seen is a shift not only towards prioritizing a curvier body and then also to prioritize a healthier and more muscular body, which is a good thing. So I was really surprised to see that this had kind of come back because I thought we had moved away from it. But I don't know. I guess these things come in waves, just like fashion. And so sadly, we're back to this. And it's really unfortunate because I think it's not only about what you do for your health right now as a 18 or 22-year-old, but those messages live with you. They follow you. And so whatever is distilled in you as this ideal body type or beauty standard, that leaves an impression that is very hard to get rid of. And so it's really troubling that younger people today are going to consume this type of content in a format that is so difficult to get away from.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. The fact that like TikTok, especially from what I hear about it, it is particularly like engaging, and it's like you hear more and more people who are like, yeah, the other algorithm-based social media websites, they generally serve up things that are loosely relevant to my interests, but I feel like I'm glued to TikTok. I've heard people suggest that their algorithmic matching of content is really hyper optimized in a way that, it sounds like I'm giving them a compliment, but it's actually like people are like, I'm like addicted to this thing, and the more time I spend on it, the worse my life is, and I feel very sad and unfulfilled after I'm on it for way too long. But yeah, it's obviously like really troubling, not just that this messaging, because like this messaging would exist, and it's like, we used to see it on like magazine covers checking out at the grocery store, but now it follows you everywhere. Yeah, I feel, Lauren, I don't know if this is this is probably a non-controversial take. At my age, I'm in my mid-30s right now. I feel like I just made it out, in the sense that like childhood got dramatically worse as technology kind of really started moving in and younger people started having more access to it. I feel like being born in the very early 1990s was like the last boat off of like, it'd be really, really challenging to be a young person these days. Like I joke, or I laugh as if I'm joking, but I'm really serious. Like my brother has young kids, and I'm just like, man, I don't even know how one begins to raise a kid in this environment with, because I assume a lot of the folks that are, primarily engaging with this skinny talk content are probably, if we're painting with a super broad brush, probably young women and girls between the ages of, who knows, 13 and mid 20s, maybe. Yeah, I don't know how you prepare somebody for that. And I think it speaks to a broader issue. I mean, like you said, it's something that this kind of messaging follows you around on the internet. And it's kind of everywhere you turn, within a certain demographic. And there's even just like the generational effects of this. Like I know someone, a young woman who her grandmother was preoccupied with thinness, like to a probably, clinically, pathological extent. And as a result, the grandmother imparted that on the mother, who then imparted that on her daughter. And it's like this 3-generation chain of, just a high level of preoccupation with food choices and eating behaviors and exercise, that you can kind of see this generation to generation kind of passing it down. And so, yeah, it's so important to kind of get ahead of this messaging. And I was like, frankly, really, as someone who studies exercise and health, like I think you and I would agree, we could feel good about what seemed to be a turning of that tide from the 90s into the 2000s, 2010s, where, yeah, it seemed like people were more into like, quote unquote curvy. And then people were like, well, how do I build curves? And it's like, let me tell you about hip thrusts or squats, and so it's like, is it necessarily that we want to promote exercise as like change your body so people think you're sexy? No. But if a change in the kind of trendy beauty standards has more people squatting and deadlifting and thinking more about what their body can do physically, that was obviously a fantastic thing. And yeah, it's really discouraging to see enough of a swing in the other direction that they have to actually take steps like banning this kind of stuff. And it should be banned. It sucks that it got that much kind of social purchase and engagement and interest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm hearing too from people who are a little bit older now saying, "Oh, I'm surrounded by people who are not overweight but are on a GLP-1 anyway." And now I as the healthy weight person who resistance trains and eats a nutritious diet is feeling like the fat one of my friends, and that's really problematic because we're again shifting that standard, and if we're seeing it on TikTok and then we're seeing it in social circles in women in their 40s and 50s, then where are we going here?
Yeah, no, that's true. And a medical breakthrough like GLP-1 drugs, it's one of those things that it's changed everything in obesity treatment, right? Like there's all these, I've talked about this on many podcasts, maybe this one, but it is such a fundamental shift in like the ability to treat obesity and reduce body weight in people who have essentially tried everything else, and have not had success reducing their body weight. You know what I mean? So like we run into when GLP-1s were first getting big and kind of getting used more broadly, people were writing articles about these side effects. And like as someone who has like, worked with bodybuilders and watched people fluctuate 30 pounds here, 30 pounds there, it was so amazing to see people being like, yeah, there's this new side effect where your butt gets kind of flabby, or there's this new side effect where your cheekbones become more prominent and your face looks really gaunt. And I was like, oh my God, like to me, that was like such a surreal moment where I was like, we are so not used to successful weight loss interventions that we are viewing the the natural consequences of substantial weight loss as side effects, as like, who knew this would happen? And to me, that was just such a like such a jarring realization. Like, you hear all the people who work in obesity medicine who are like, treatment has been so unsuccessful for so long in so many patients. And to me, that was such a big clarifying moment to see all those articles. But as you're alluding to, there's also the downside, which is that as much as that has helped so many people that have tried earnestly so many other treatment options, and it's doing so much positive for their health, there's also, once it's out there, right? So you're going to have people who are using it who maybe don't need it, maybe shouldn't use it, like people who frankly are, I've seen more than a couple anecdotes of people who said, yeah, my doctor told me that now I have like, kind of like a mild case of osteoporosis because I basically was, using Ozempic to not to get from a BMI of 34 to 26. I was using it to get from a BMI of 23 to 17. And in the process, I didn't eat anything and I didn't do any exercise and I didn't load my skeleton. So I rapidly lost weight, went from a normal BMI to an underweight BMI, and now I have low bone density. And that's not something that you can just reverse quickly, especially later in life. So yeah, it's an interesting time right now to see that as, I guess what I'm getting at here, the overarching point of my thesis is skinny has never felt so accessible. You know what I mean? Like being just genuinely like very thin has never seemed this accessible to such a large percentage of the population. And I think that probably what we're experiencing is kind of a downstream effect of like, oh, so this is on the table now. Maybe I will dabble in it. And I think, when you combine that with the pressures of social media, and all that societal pressure that's kind of always been there, like even when beauty standards, started shifting in a slightly healthier BMI range, it didn't change the fact that there's ample evidence that there's weight stigma that happens out in public, weight stigma that happens in the medical office. It's not like our society was like, oh, glad that, preoccupation with lean physiques is over. Now we can, move on to more pressing matters. It was still there. It's just, the kind of ideal shifted a tiny bit, right? But there was still a huge percentage of the population that felt that constant pressure to be thinner. And yeah, I think social media amplifies that. The accessibility of drugs makes that actually, it almost kind of increases the pressure to the extent that's like, this is now more accessible to you than it's ever been, so you better do it. Yeah, really a perfect storm for some pretty unfortunate stuff. And Lauren, as you're more aware than anyone, just in terms of your area of research, it's not just that it is a unpleasant way to live, being preoccupied with thinness and pushing yourself to these low body weights, and the kind of short-term, acute, transient side effects that you may experience if you have really low energy availability and things like that. It really is the long-term stuff that I think is that is also really insidious and people don't think about as much. Just the long-term maintaining the health of your bones, maintaining that robustness and independence into your later years. I think that's just the stuff that when people think about getting very thin, it's the last thing on their mind. And it's something that, decades later, years down the road, you really kind of wish you were thinking with with more foresight, in terms of what that would look like in the future. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's also changes the way we view food and the way we develop a relationship with exercise, because if diet and exercise are always these levers that we pull for weight loss, then we're not developing any sort of sustainable habits long term. And so we're only exercising because we want to lose weight. We're only looking at our diet in terms of eating less and less and less because we want to lose weight. And so ultimately you end up with a really broken relationship with both of those things. You haven't developed any sustainable habits. And you know what? Even if you look great at 45, thin as a rail, you're not looking so good at 75. And you're not functioning very well at 75. And so I think even now, a lot of the women who are in the kind of menopause transition period of life come from an upbringing that really emphasized thinness, emphasized doing tons of cardio to stay thin, extreme diet protocols to stay thin. And so that really sticks with them throughout this later stage of life. And that prevents them from these longer term outlooks of, hey, what can I do not only to improve my body composition, but keeping in mind the fact that I want to be an independent, functioning 70, 80, 90-year-old.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is, you know, now that I'm old, Lauren, I look at the young people and I'm like, please, think more about, what it's going to look like the sixth, seventh, eighth decade of life and beyond. And I have noticed it's become more pertinent to the way I exercise and the way I like to train. But at the same time, I know what I was like when I was 19, and it's so hard to make that salient to people who are, really just focused on whether it's wanting to look a certain way or wanting to weigh a certain amount or wanting to perform a certain way for their sport. It's really, really difficult to convey to a young person who has this short-term goal just staring right at them, like, right, but how is this going to serve you when you're 75? But yeah, that's part of life, is kind of having that become more and more salient the older you get, and hopefully there's enough people out here who are fighting the good fight, who can at least put that information out there and say, like, hey, listen, if you're like at a completely healthy body weight and you're thinking about getting on Ozempic and you're trying to get to this weight that you have in mind, first of all, let's calculate that BMI. Oh, you're clearly trying to go outside of what's considered the healthy range. So strike one, right? Along the way, like, what kind of training are you planning to do? And if the answer was, I hadn't really thought about it, that answer is none, right? And so we're talking about like people that are setting themselves up for, something that's just really not conducive to their long-term health. And I think the more that people can kind of put out content that highlights those potential risks while also acknowledging the net benefit of these drugs, it's kind of a sweet spot that you have to get, and it's a really difficult line to kind of straddle there, because the last thing you want to do at the same time, Lauren, is stigmatize these drugs. You don't want to discourage someone who is a prime candidate for using these drugs and say, well, I read that one article and all I really retained from it is that my bone density is going to go to crap and I'm going to, be in a nursing home 20 years earlier than I should because all my bones are brittle and I'm not mobile and independent. So it's a really fine line to be drawn, and usually TikTok is where you want to go for that highly nuanced health communication, generally in long form.
Speaking of how dumb the youths are, I don't know if this is a Canada thing, but everyone who is under 25 seems to wear slides with socks to the gym.
To the gym?
To the gym. It's so annoying. Like slides, long socks, and they just shuffle around the gym.
I have not seen that in the gym. No gym I've ever been to has permitted that. It's pretty much...
No gym does permit it.
Yeah.
But this is what they're doing.
Yeah, I do know that young people do like to wear the... What do you call them? Slides? Is that the term?
It's a sandal that is that doesn't have a buckle or a whatever. Yeah,
I've seen that young people wear them, and especially on a college campus, you can tell who's athletes or not. They're all wearing like the team issued gear and stuff. And if I were a coach, I would really take issue with that, because they're like walking around banging their toes on stuff, tripping over their oversized slides. And I'm like, I don't need you like breaking a bone in your foot because you're wearing these ridiculous things all day. Like, put on a pair of shoes that support your foot and walk around like an adult. Yeah, I that would drive me nuts, honestly. And I actually did have some coaches back in the day who were adamant about that. They're like, don't wear that crap. If you're gonna wear a shoe, tie the thing on and make sure it's secure so you're not tripping around and turning your ankle and then you're unavailable on Saturday. But yeah,
And cover your toes. No one wants to see them.
Yeah, like, because Lauren, obviously, if you're going to drop a 45-pound plate directly on your toe, you want an eighth inch of cloth there from the shoe. That ultra thin leather is going to be the difference. But no, I definitely, despite my facetious line there, I don't understand it. But there's a lot about young people I don't understand, and I choose very deliberately to embrace the differences and say, what a world we live in. What interesting people. And I do not, I'm fighting the urge to become the old man who just, has a grudge with all people younger than him for any variety of reasons that could be plucked out of thin air. So I'm going to leave him alone with the sandals. But I would say if you're a competitive athlete, maybe wear shoes that don't actively trip you every like 35 seconds, because that seems to be what I observe on campus. All right, Lauren, are we done ranting about young people?
I think so.
All right, Lauren, I think that does it for this episode. I want to thank everyone for joining us for episode 10 here. Thanks again for everyone who's been along for all 10. Appreciate the support. If you want to send us interesting headlines that you'd like to hear more about, you can send us a little letter to the editor at frontpagefitnesspodcast@gmail.com. One thing that you should not send there is any more hate about my perspectives on cannolis or macaroni and cheese or cereal. All the food stuff from now on, I'm just going to say, hey, if you want to litigate it on your own, go for it. I'm going to leave the legal scholarship to somebody else. So thanks so much for joining us. We will be back in 1 week. Take care.